100.3 FM, WBNY, Buffalo.
That are shaping our world for today and for tomorrow. Join us weekly on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. following Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! Program. And of course, our program is live, so you can call and you can join our discussion. We really hope that you will. Our number here again is 716-878-5104. That's 716-878-5104. We've also got a pass that allows us to walk around in the 21st century as if we belong there. Even though people like me belong in the 19th and the 20th century, it's okay. It's okay because we have Willie H., and he does have citizenship in the 21st century. Welcome, Willie.
Welcome everybody to For Living for the People with L. Nathan Hare.
He does the live streaming of the program, and we have our in-studio audience of one, Norm McCarter here. Welcome, Norm.
Good morning, Mr. Hare.
Norm helps us to stay grounded so we don't get too far away from where our audience is coming from. But I wanted to take today's program to build a little bit on a thesis that we started on Friday. I think it's important for us to understand things in context. Right now, we see this attempt being made, I think successfully, by the right wing in this country to make it appear that the train wreck that happened in East Palestine, Ohio, was evidence of elite, East Coast, snobbish people who don't have any regard for the people that live in the Midwest, the heartland people of the country. And because of their snobbish attitude towards the, I guess they consider, they believe that the elite see these Midwestern people as lowbrows, this snobbish attitude towards these regular, ordinary type people that live in the Midwest resulted in lack of care for the safety and the lives of those people, putting their lives in peril by having trains running through their neighborhoods, through their area, that have dangerous chemicals on them, that have things that if they spilled, could cause ecological disasters and kill people, which happened, right? When that some 20 of the cars that were in this train wreck, where there were 70 cars in the train wreck, 20 of those cars had these dangerous chemicals that were in those cars. And that's what the danger was for the people in that neighborhood. But to try to turn this into evidence that the elite in this country are snobbish and, don't really care about the interest of the people that live in the heartland, and the people that live in the heartland are being placed in terrible danger because they run these trains through those communities, and rather than run those trains through the middle of Philadelphia, I want you to know that they do run those trains to Philadelphia. Can I just help us understand something? Mm-hmm. All trains go someplace. Trains don't go from East Palestine to Lordstown to go from one community of 4,000 people that run 400 miles to another community of 4,000 people. That wouldn't make the trains economically feasible to run. Obviously, these trains are carrying passengers as well as freight, and they're taking those trains right through cities like Cleveland, like Cincinnati, like Buffalo, like Philadelphia, and so on. It's just a lie that the right wing portray, and because they think that you don't know any better, you don't think about it any harder. It just sounds like it's logical to you. You go for it. But let's be real clear about this. Where are the jobs that are being created in this country? Where are they being located? We see because I accept the proposition. In fact, let me get to this in a little bit of a different way. When the globalization in this country began to take hold in the Reagan administration, when they began to make it like the big thing, to globalize. Globalize meant that we moved at manufacturing jobs from the United States to other countries, supposedly because they had lower wage rates, and that would in turn result in the prices of those goods being sold back to Americans at a lower price. Even for those of you all that are real young, weren't born until 1970, and so on. Do you recall any products, Fisher Price toys or, yo-yos or any manufactured product, in the 1980s where the price of the product dropped by 30% or 40% when they began to globalize? Any of you recall that occurring?
No.
That didn't happen, did it?
No, sir.
But those companies did move their manufacturing facilities overseas.
Yes, sir.
So if they moved the manufacturing facilities overseas, and the benefit was going to be lower cost goods that would come back to the United States, how come we didn't see the lower cost goods? They kept the savings.
Yeah.
When they were used to be paying $30-$40 an hour, for labor, now they're paying $1 an hour, 50 cents an hour, for labor. You would think that savings would have come back to the United States in terms of lower costs for those goods and services. But that's not what happened, did it?
Well, the little guy doesn't see that savings. That doesn't go into our pockets at all.
Well, I want you to understand that even the big guy doesn't see that savings. The big guy who owns the corporation sees those savings.
Profits.
But the big guy who just makes $400,000 a year, $500,000 a year working on a job, they're a host at, Buffalo's, NBC radio or TV program or whatever. I don't know what those people make, per year. But let's say you're making, $200,000-$300,000 a year. You're still getting products that used to cost you $2 per pound or $15 per piece or whatever it was. They still cost you $3 a pound. They still cost you $15 a piece. You didn't get any, even if you were a rich person, you didn't get any benefit in terms of lower cost of those goods and services.
Well, let me just ask, if there's really no benefit coming to us, what is the benefit of outsourcing jobs?
Profit.
See, now, Norm, that's why we have the citizen here, okay? Because Norm put his thumb on the nail of what the real issue is. How is it that they do this, something so major as taking several million manufacturing jobs out of the United States, and not only do they transfer these jobs to other countries, we financed it.
Right.
We financed it because they changed the way that you depreciated assets. They went to something called the 20%, cost recovery depreciation, which meant that instead of depreciating something based on its life, if it's something that's a 30-year property, you depreciate it at 1/30th, per year. Depreciation meant that you could deduct that value from your gross income, lowering your gross income, therefore lowering your taxes. By going to a 20% first-year cost recovery, that meant that something that would have taken 30 years to get depreciated will now only take 24 years to get depreciated, and you could capture 6 years of depreciation in the first year. That's a tremendous tax savings, for people. That's just one thing. They developed something. This is your cousin, you were there. I know you were in grade school, but you were there. Ronald Reagan, you run around, you had Reagan flags on, you had little hats that you wore over your face, Ronald Reagan, he's our guy. I don't hate Ronald Reagan. I'm just saying that the Arthur Laffer supply side, economic theory that he built the economy of the United States in the 1980s on didn't work. It didn't work in the end, and it was predicted that it wasn't going to work in the beginning. But they went for this hustle anyway. And then, of course, they blame black people because white people wound up getting displaced as a result of this globalization initiative. Can I do some truth for y'all? Sometimes I get away from myself, and I need to be sure that I'm focusing in on truth. Can I help you out with something?
Yes, sir.
That maybe you didn't have in your head. You might have it, Norm, because you're a wise guy. But I went to an article written called 12 Manufacturing Companies in Buffalo, New York. Have you ever heard of a place called Ivoclar Vivadent?
No, sir.
Never heard of it, right? They employ somewhere between 200 and 500 people in Buffalo, New York. In fact, their address is Buffalo, New York. They're not physically in Buffalo, New York. They're near Buffalo, New York. But their address is Buffalo, New York. So if you're one of these Midwestern, white people that feels that you've been mistreated and underserved by your Congress people, you say, well, look, they just had Ivoclar Vivadent, built out there, in Buffalo. But Ivoclar Vivadent was not built in Buffalo. It was built outside of Buffalo. You ever been to a place called Schenectady?
I've heard of it.
Outside of Albany, very close to Albany,
I've
right?
heard of it.
Schenectady's big thing is gum. They make spearmint gum, all those different versions of spearmint gum. 80% of the people that work in Schenectady either work for spearmint or they work for some industry that's dependent on spearmint. Either they work in a restaurant or they work in, a gas station, or they work in some delivery, operation or something that is directly connected to spearmint, the spearmint manufacturing facility. In fact, the companies that have had the workers that have had the most success in terms of being able to work their entire lives in the same place and retire are those people who work in companies that are essentially, company towns. The plant is the lifeblood of the community.
Yeah.
But in Buffalo, none of the plants are inside of Buffalo. I mean, when they closed Buffalo Forge and Republic Steel, none of the plants are inside of Buffalo. All the plants are someplace else. And you have to get a bus. If you don't have transportation, you do know that 6 out of 10 Buffalo households don't have a car. So they got to take a bus. But if there's no bus that takes you out to East Amherst or to Lockport or wherever it is you're trying to, you got to go, you got a tough row to hoe. How many of you ever heard of a place called St. Gobain? You didn't hear that? I thought you all would raise your hands. It's located in Buffalo, New York. According to their address here on the internet, they're located in Buffalo, New York, but there's no St. Gobain in Buffalo, New York. There's a St. Gobain near Buffalo, New York, but not one in Buffalo, New York. Guess how many people work for St. Gobain? Another manufacturing facility built in the area of Buffalo, making it appear that Buffalo is getting the benefit of these manufacturing facilities. They're getting jobs, but in fact, Buffalo workers aren't getting those jobs. Those jobs are going to people that live in Marilla, in Evans. And no disrespect, because I want the people in Marilla and Evans and Eden, and Angola, and Cheektowaga and Salamanca. I want all of them to get jobs, to have careers. I want that to occur. But I want that to occur for people who live on the east side of Buffalo as well. I want it to occur to be incurred for the people that live on the west side of Buffalo as well, right? I mean, I want all of us to be able to participate in the new economy, but that's not what happens. Did you know how many people work for St. Gobain?
No, sir.
50,000?
10,000 people. This is a company built in the last 15 years outside of Buffalo with your tax dollars, and they probably employ 3 African people and probably employ them as toilet, cleaners and so on. And Buffalo gets no benefit from this at all, even though it's imaged nationally as, wow, Buffalo's doing great. They got this company that's, brought 10,000 jobs to Buffalo. Do you know what 10,000 jobs would do for Buffalo if we had 10,000 new jobs today show up in Buffalo? out of our workforce.
It would revitalize.
I mean, you're
Buffalo.
talking about a city of less than 300,000 people. So you probably got a workforce of somewhere around 150,000 people. If you have 10,000 new jobs show up for that workforce, you would probably wipe unemployment almost out. Unemployment would go down around 2%.
Mr. Hare, I just got to ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
If these companies are employing this many people, and as you say, they're on the outskirts of Buffalo, not really Buffalo, even though they're utilizing the Buffalo name.
Right.
How come we haven't heard of these companies, and how come we're not benefiting from the companies
because
as a consumer?
The companies that, or the people that own these companies, they're going to the federal government and they're applying for grants. They're applying for tax breaks, and things like that. They're not applying to Buffalo for these things because Buffalo doesn't have them. The taxes aren't being levied by Buffalo. The grants that finance, putting these new operations into urban areas, those grants aren't coming to Buffalo. They're coming from the federal government.
But the question now, with that being said, I know when they levy grants and they bring the grants down, there has to be a certain amount of people, and they're using Buffalo's name as if it's coming from Buffalo.
Because that's the core of them, what you're pointing on right now that I'm trying to get people to understand. I've just talked about 3 companies so far. I haven't told you about Coca-Cola that has almost 5,000 people. I mean, y'all know who Coca-Cola is.
Okay, I got Coke. Yeah.
Do you know anybody working for Coca-Cola?
No.
Do you know a single person?
I applied for them.
I didn't ask you, did you apply? I asked you, do you know a single person in your life that's working for Coca-Cola right now in the Buffalo area?
No.
So Coca-Cola got money, grant money from the federal government, got low interest loans financed through the federal government, got all kinds of, waivers and so on, so that they were able to get set up. But they got set up not in Buffalo. They got set up in a place near Buffalo. But when Congress people start talking about who's getting what pieces of the money, being shelled out by the federal government, they say, well, Buffalo's doing great. They got Coca-Cola, they got this St. Glovin, company, they got all these places out here that are getting money. So we don't need to put any more money into these areas. We need to put the money into East Palestine. But the reality is East Palestine, they had the manufacturing facilities. I mean, can we just be brutally honest about this?
Yeah.
East Palestine and communities like them, Rome, New York, Ithaca, and so on, they had these jobs in their areas. You lived in those areas. You lived in Medina. You lived in outside of Syracuse and so on, or lived in Syracuse. You lived in these areas where these manufacturing companies were, but you couldn't get a job other than sweeping the floor, sweeping metal, shavings off the floor. You couldn't get a job. So the same white people that are complaining now that they've been abused by globalization, that their jobs have been transferred to, companies in Ireland and India and Indonesia and so on, which they have a right to complain about. They have a right to go to the federal government and say, you're not treating us right. Why would you allow this to occur? That's correct. But those same white people are the ones that denied employment opportunities to black people. So that when you went to work for Bethlehem Steel, when you went to work for Republic Steel, when you went to work for Houdaille Industries, you went to work for Westinghouse and so on, you were the last in line. No matter how early you applied, you were the last in line. And only a trickle of you, 1 or 2% of you were able to get a job in those places and so on. So they didn't have a problem when they were discriminating against African people and keeping us out of those jobs, and their unions organized to help keep African people out of those jobs. It's only been in the late 1960s that those unions began to break down the barriers and offer some redress, not much, but some redress, giving some opportunities or making some opportunities available to African and Hispanic people. But the reality is these people that are complaining right now about globalization are the same people that did the apartheid discrimination against black and brown people in this country. Do you remember the movie Roots?
Yes, sir.
No, not Roots. That's the wrong one. The Color Purple.
Yes, sir.
You remember the main character was played by a woman. Her character's name was Phoebe.
Oh, yeah.
And her husband was played by Danny Glover. There's a scene in the movie where Phoebe turns to Danny Glover, who just mistreated her terribly. She turns to him and she says, "I just want you to know that every single thing that you do to me, it's going to end up being done to you many times over."
Yes, sir.
And he winds up being penniless. She winds up being a shop owner, right? She gets out of the sort of post-plantation slavery, life that she was forced to live. Now she's got her own shop. She's sewing dresses. She's got customers and whatnot. Life is working. And he's sitting over there on this little flea-ridden, farm and whatnot with no crops and no money coming in and so on, right? Everything she forecast to happen to him occurred. Well, that's what's happening to white people right now. I know you don't like to hear this, but this is the truth. The things that you did to black people, the things that you did to brown people, to deny them the opportunity to proportionately be able to get into the same jobs that you had been able to get into, which should have been the norm. But the things that you did to them, those are the injuries that are coming back to you now. You never thought this would happen to you because you never thought that your own people would turn on you. But for money, you need to understand this reality. For money, whites turn against other whites for money. When they saw an opportunity to be able to lower their taxes, you got that 20%, first year cost recovery. You got the accelerated cost recovery program. You got the investment tax credit. Do you know what that was? That's where if you made it an investment, take some of your real money and made it put it into something that could be called an investment, you could take 10% of whatever that investment was, and it was treated as if it was a tax credit. A tax credit is much better than a tax deduction. A tax deduction lowers your income that you got to pay taxes on. But a tax credit lowers the actual amount of taxes that you owe. So if you owe $10,000 worth of taxes and you had an investment of, say, $100,000, you got a $10,000 tax credit for making that investment. You could wipe out $10,000 worth of taxes that you would have owed to the federal government. That's what really helped to finance moving these jobs from the United States into other countries, because it costs money to rebuild or build factories in other countries. You had to pay for that. And of course, the people that own these companies in the United States didn't want to pay for it. But if they got this big flow of cash from lower taxes, they could use that money to be able to finance moving their jobs overseas. And your Ronald Reagans and your Arthur Laffers and, all your fan club, the Republican, capitalist fan club, because of the moves that they made, they were able to do that, move those jobs overseas, take those jobs away from Americans, never lowered the cost of the products. So they got all of the benefits and we incurred all of the costs.
So you're basically saying in the 80s, when Reagan was doing his thing, he took the opportunity, he outsourced jobs. He was, I guess you could give him the father of outsourcing.
Well, let's not say he outsourced jobs. Let's say that he supported those private sector people who wanted to outsource their jobs.
Okay.
He supported policies that made that easier for them to do.
In this process, these companies got fat, got rich during that time frame, and we as a people didn't benefit. I can't really see any benefits from it.
Right.
Even when you look at it, like we discussed the other day, take away. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. It displaced 8 to 15 million American workers, almost as many as were displaced by the coronavirus.
Yeah.
It
Put people
displaced
out of work.
Right.
I mean, it's crippling the economy here.
But the thing that is so irritating about it, so now what you've done is help us to capture the reality. The reality is that the globalization, outsourcing, offshoring, and all that stuff that they were doing, they ended up transferring 8 to 15 million manufacturing jobs, and probably other jobs wound up being transferred to other countries. Supposedly, we're going to get lower cost products in return. We never got the lower cost products in return. We never got the lower taxes because they did this by financing lower taxes. Right. So we lost revenue to finance the cost of the federal government, which added to our deficits. Right. And we didn't get the lower cost goods. And we had 8 to 15 million people that lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And the result of that is the Republicans turned around and said, well, you know why that happened? It's the civil rights people. It was Martin Luther King. It was Charles Lowry. It was Reverend Ralph Abernathy. It was, what's his name? Benny Thompson. It was Rosa Parks. It's those civil rights people. All those things that we had to do to shut those civil rights people up. That's the reason why you all don't have those jobs now, because those resources went to African people. That's a bold-faced lie.
Yeah.
That did not occur. But white people in this country, not everybody, but a large number of white people, enough to keep tipping the scales so that people like Ronald Reagan and the first George Bush and the second George Bush and Donald Trump wind up becoming presidents of the United States, and they exacerbate these policies that created these anomalies that caused this dislocation of the economies and job opportunities in these Midwestern communities. Instead of attacking black people, you need to turn around and point your finger at the white people who orchestrated these policies and these economic moves. That's who you should be focusing on, because they're the ones who did this to you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Willie. When I look at it and I hear what you're just saying, they basically gaslighted us to believe certain things, and they received all of this investment tax capital, tax credit, and it's just something that, as far as I'm concerned, it's trying to just pull the wool over our eyes, and we never got back anything.
Right.
It's been since the 80s.
And the problem is, it's easy to pull the wool over the eyes of these Midwestern type, white people, these sort of heartland of the country type white people. It's easy to pull the wool over their eyes if you say it's black people that are behind the wool. As long as you can just say it's black people that are the problem, they go for it every single time.
Yeah.
But you're talking about the people who you're saying are the problem are the people that have the least resources. How can the people with the least resources be the ones that are causing your problem when the people that are getting fat? We've talked about this on this program.
Yes.
The top 20% of people in this country have seen their incomes go up significantly. Something like, I think for the average income, we talked about this on my Saturday program. The average income for a middle income American from 1970 to 2021 went from something like $59,000 a year to $90,000 a year. The average income for the upper 20% went from, I hope I'm saying this right, went from $131,000 a year to $216,000 a year. That's the average income for the top 20%. Now, I'm not talking about the top 1%, because their average income is like, $400 million, a year. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the top 20% of income earners in the country. Those people, their incomes went from $119,000 to $216,000 a year. You need to understand who it is that's preying on you and why who's getting the benefit from it, and start getting your eyes focused on your real enemy and not focusing on black and brown people. Listen, we're going to take a quick break. Hopefully I haven't driven you all away. I just wanted you to understand the reality of what's going on. We will see you on the other side of the break here at Living for the People at 91.3 FM WBNY.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is often laced into illicit drugs and used to make fake versions of prescription pills. You can't see it, taste it, or smell it. Suppliers mix fentanyl into their products because it's potent and cheap, and the dealer might not even know. Keep yourself and others safe by knowing the real deal on fentanyl. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com. This message is brought to you by the Ad Council.
All right, welcome back to Living for the People. This is L. Nathan Hare, your host. We're here with Willie H., who does the live streaming of the program, and Norma Carter, who is our in-studio audience of one. And we're talking about trying to understand better what's going on in this country that seems to be being a premise being built upon by the right wing in this country. The right wing in this country always represents the interests of the upper class, but they do it by pretending that they're defending the interests of the middle income and lower income Americans, and they're defending them against the predatory behavior that they're claiming is being engaged in by elite Americans on behalf of minority Americans in this country. And I just want you all to understand this reality. Just to go back a little bit so you understand what I mean about how federal money has come to our area but not come to Buffalo, and that we end up with the veneer of all this investment taking place in Buffalo when in fact it bypassed Buffalo. Give you an example. I told you about Ivoclar Vivident.
Yes, sir. 200
to 500 employees. St. Gobain, we talked about, more than 10,000 employees. Their address is Buffalo, New York. I can't find a single person, not one person, that I've been able to come across in the last week who ever even heard of St. Gobain, let alone that they were supposed to be a Buffalo-based company. I know we got a caller coming on real quick. I just want to quickly say Coca-Cola has anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 employees outside of supposedly in Buffalo. Car Plugs, 500 employees. Train Technologies, more than 10,000 employees work for Train Technologies. They're in Williamsville, New York. Have you ever heard of them?
No.
Yeah, I'm just trying to help us to understand what's going on. They got there with your money. Through tax breaks, through grants, they got there with your money. You know, waivers and so on, they got there with your money. But you haven't seen a nickel of that benefit coming to you in Buffalo.
Mr. I know you got to take. I have a question after the call.
Okay, let me grab that call real quick. Hi, caller, are you there?
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
All right, I know I'm railing and whatnot, so forgive me for railing.
Well, I just wanted to pile it on. Not to take away your message, in fact, actually to supplement it, is not only the company's name was familiar to me, and I couldn't remember what it was, and I had to look it up.
Uh-huh.
And it turns out that St. Gobain, in addition to the accusations or the facts that you're laying out for us, which was new to me, but doesn't surprise me all that much, they also have been doing a classist discriminatory issue, which is they've been a major polluter in New York State and elsewhere at their facilities.
That's what I meant by waivers, because they said, well, they're putting 10,000 people to work, outside of Buffalo. So, it's just a little bit of toxic waste. It's not that much. So let's give them a shot.
Well, up in Hoosick Falls and elsewhere, where in New York and in Vermont, they would argue it was not just a little bit of toxic waste.
Exactly.
It was a lot.
Exactly.
And so I think it just shows, and as an example, that there are many prongs to the abuse that large moneyed corporations can utilize the federal government and other agencies for in furthering their criminal enterprise.
Yep.
And it actually, ironically or not surprisingly, crosses not just racial lines but also crosses class lines. And so those communities that they polluted, I guarantee you, not a whole lot of African Americans there, but certainly a lot of poor people, poor white people.
Absolutely, and who are going to be even poorer,
right,
when the volume of these pollutants get to the point where they can't even do their manufacturing operations anymore.
It shut down the water supply systems for the communities in here.
Yep.
So it's criminal and it's pervasive and it's across multiple platforms.
I remember when, I think her name is Lois Gibbs, the Love Canal champion, and when it was going down, I was grown, at that time, and when it was going down, the thing that my father kept telling me, he says, we couldn't get a job out there to save our lives. They wouldn't do a thing for us. But then when they found out they were poisoning all of these people over there and they had to leave, all of a sudden, everybody became champions of, a clean environment and so on.
Yeah, but it wasn't a clean. Actually, it was ironic that given the population that was there, very, I don't want to say poor, but very modest white, lower middle class.
Right.
They had a big struggle.
Yeah, they had cottage-type houses and whatnot,
and they were being blown off by the state, by everybody.
And the thing that is I'm so glad you brought that up, because the thing that was so wrenching about it is you knew that this was being done. Occidental was doing this stuff. You knew this. You've known this for 30 or 40 years. And when this happened and they had to shut this thing down, you knew that you needed to provide some basket that you could put that workforce in until you could transfer those workers to another, system of employment. They didn't do any of that. It would have been just as costly to provide a basket for these people to. You remember when they had something called the Trade Readjustment Allowance? In this country.
Out of my league, I don't know.
Okay, well, I'm older. See, I remember this when globalization occurred. All these people lost their jobs because their manufacturing jobs were transferred overseas. So the country came up with something called trade readjustment, so they could take care of these mostly white workers, where they got extended unemployment. And I think I've written it down here a bit. They got something like 178 weeks of unemployment, like 5 years, almost 6 years worth of unemployment, to allow them to be able to have income security while they got free training, paid for by the federal government, and job placement services to help them to get relocated. And then what happened was most of those guys, because I used to do employment work, they were like 40, 45, 50 years old. They weren't interested in learning a new trade. They're 10, 15 years away from retirement. Why do they want to learn a new trade? And so those guys just milked the programs for as long as they possibly could, and they became a part of the same fan base that we see talking about East Palestine right now. Oh, woe is us. We've been preyed upon. Yeah, but you were preying on other people all during the course of this time period.
Yeah, I mean, look, the communities end up being the biggest cheerleaders for some of these industrial expansions that ends up killing them ultimately in the long run. So, I mean, it's dual-edged. I mean, you're talking about exporting jobs and employment, but we tend to be I think the good thing you're doing is you're bringing to light the current activities that are going on rather than the past needs, and that we don't have to look very far. We keep saying, oh, well, how could we have discriminated against African Americans for getting loans and for getting, redlining and all that stuff, and that's all deemed as old history, when you're now revealing that, well, no, the history hasn't changed, and so there has to be more heat brought to light on. By the way, one of the more recent article that actually told me about Saint-Gobain was an attorney for their company was fired when and he called a whistleblower lawsuit against them because he was trying to bring to light that the company was still was polluting and they were covering it up.
Yep.
And so. So this was not, I'm sure, a poorly paid executive.
And see, the thing that's so irritating about it is all of the money that they're spending on lawyers and on subsidies, for these companies to keep them from going under, and all that stuff. You could take that same money, you could provide a income floor for the people that have been dislocated by the decisions that have been made in the past, and then use more money to be able to create new industries. We have tidal forces that can be used to create electricity. Our lake can create tidal forces to create electricity. We have geothermal in our area. We have solar in our area. We have wind in our area. We got wind up the yin yang. You get wind all the time in Buffalo, right? I mean, if we electric batteries, we're going to need electric batteries forever. Right. So if we began to use our resources to construct new industries that will absorb all of these people that were dislocated because of globalization, you end up with everybody having a win-win. Instead of taking things away from people, you add to everybody. You just got to make sure that everybody grows the same. If there's 100 people in the area and 13 of them are African people, there's 100 jobs in the area. 12 or 13 of those jobs ought to go to African people. It's not going to be perfectly proportionate, but you know what I mean? If people just see that they're all participating in the economy, you don't get all that whining, in the population. That's really the way that we got to go. I don't understand why we can't see this. We're spending the money anyway. Right?
Yeah, I think, though, one of the challenges with these larger initiatives, and particularly with larger companies, is that they are more easily corruptible or corrupting in the government that they're in terms of their influence with those governments. So I think there is not an equal playing field at those who come to the table with the government with these proposals. They want to go for big companies that they think can pull it off. And in doing that, they end up getting into trouble usually because they just do. They didn't look at their past history. They didn't do their due diligence on them. Whatever it may be, it was a quick fix. So I think the problem with large projects, large developers, large companies brings a lot of baggage with that usually ends up going south. I mean, look at Tesla right now in South Buffalo. So I think you have to have a more the trouble with the opposite extreme, which is a grassroots approach, is you have people with no background and no experience and or very little and very hard to vet. So I don't know, but I think I would go more towards smaller initiatives and high scrutiny within reason. But see, the problem is when you decentralize, then each of the municipalities are left with trying to do all the, I don't know. It's really bad. The federal government can't seem to be minding the store, and now even the local level can't seem to mind the store.
Well, it would seem that we would hire enough people to do the monitoring. You can't create a 10,000 person enterprise and have one person as the monitor of the whole thing. Right.
Hey guys, I'm curious. Tesla, what's going on with Tesla? They're one of the big companies in Buffalo.
Oh, first, I don't think they reached their employment targets, and nobody seems to know. I think what if they ever achieve them. Now there's a unionization effort going on, and they fired in droves a whole bunch of employees there.
They were supposed to create 2,500 jobs. I don't think they ever got more than 1,800 jobs, and I think they've lost a number of those. See, what happens with companies like Tesla is that they learned over time that they could make the same number of cars with fewer people because people learn, you know what I mean? So how you originally, configured your company with experience, your company winds up being configured in a different way. They didn't have any way to transition.
More than that going on, but that's I don't know. I mean, almost so many of these companies that come in with these and we have their quotas, they never reach their quotas.
Ever. Well, they were lying when they said they were going to get 2,500 jobs in the first place.
And even if they did, if you took the amount of grant money that was being given them and divided that by the number of jobs, I mean, my gosh, you just could have given a regular salary to the people and save a whole lot of money.
Like $100,000, per job.
Why don't we just give them a do-nothing job and just say, here's the money, and you won the lottery, and go away.
There you go. I think that makes a lot of sense.
That could have been my job.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, man. I appreciate you. Okay.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Talk to you soon.
Yep.
It was interesting. I came across an article written by Atlantic Magazine, has a correspondent. His name is Adam Serwer, and he calls this a calamity thesis. Right? I never heard this before. Right? A calamity thesis about working class white America has endured a social catastrophe rooted in globalization and cultural change that liberal elites won't acknowledge, fomenting backlash. He says that this story is inevitably privileged working class white victimization as a driving fact of U.S. policies. The problem with Serwer's thesis, I get his thesis, it makes sense, but what it does is it almost legitimizes, the idea of creating this class of white victims of America's globalization. We do have a class. I mean, we can't say it's not true. If you were working, remember when we had Bethlehem Steel was here? We had Titan Steel, we had Acme Steel, we had Republic, we had Buffalo Forge and so on. Big companies. Between them, they employed something like 40 or 50,000 people, right? When those jobs got globalized and went other places, those 40 or 50,000 people and the 3 or 4 other people per household they were supporting with their paychecks, that's something like 200,000 people suddenly were destitute. Nothing was done to help that population of people. That's where we really dropped the ball. Go ahead.
Well, here's the issue I have with what you just brought up. In this in his thesis, and he's talking about white America being victimized. If you victimize white America through globalization, what does that say about what you do to us?
What it says to me is you have to first recognize what happened to the white communities who lost their jobs because of this globalization stuff that went down.
Okay.
You can't act like that didn't happen.
Okay.
That happened.
Yes, sir.
They had bread on the table on Tuesday, and they had wafers on the table on Wednesday.
Okay.
That happened to them. So you can't act like that didn't happen.
Not saying
policy. I'm just saying policy has to be developed to address that problem for that population of people. What I'm saying is simultaneously, you can't turn around and say that, well, we didn't used to give job opportunities to African people, and now you're giving African people jobs, and that's costing us jobs for our people. We're the ones who are being hurt. You can't play that game.
Right.
You have to say that the African people who you have been joining in victimizing over the course of the last many decades, you got to make sure that those black and brown people, that they're in the mix and they proportionately benefit from whatever it is that you do, so all the boats rise in the same way, in the same proportion. If you do that, then your attention is focused on who's causing the problem in the first place. The problem is being caused by people with money seeing opportunities to make more money with less workers or lower cost workers, and then using us. They literally use us. They use our tax dollars to pay for moving the jobs that were U.S. jobs over to China and to Indonesia and Malaysia and Ireland and places. I mean, what's wrong with you? And why are you supporting people like that?
Right.
Take those MAGA hats off. Don't ever wear a MAGA hat again. Keep those people away from the TVs. Do not allow this stuff to get inside your head. Go ahead.
Okay. Like I say, I totally respect what you're just saying, but people of color have to be included in the thesis,
No
just
question.
like you just said.
No question. You have to do it where it's proportionate.
Yeah.
Right.
The next thing I wanted to bring up, because this is something that really kind of bothers me. You have, just like you stated earlier, you got these companies, Ivocare, Vivadent, Saint Gobain, and Coke. They're using the Buffalo name
Right.
as as a housing area to
Right.
where they supposedly are, and they're not. Monies come, and especially when you are trying to get a grant, different things. It comes for the people per capita. How many people are living in this particular area, and we are taken away. We're not receiving loans, just like these companies, different things. All of these things are affecting us in a terrible manner. There should be something that should be done with that. You know what I mean? Just like years ago when I met you, years ago, I was working, for grassroots, trying to
Right.
get block grant funding for a youth
Initiative,
thing.
right? Yep.
But the block grant monies are you have to be able to get them, and how can you when everything is moved away and they're
See, there
outsourcing
are ways to make things work systemically better. So, for example, instead of having a rule thing that says that you have to give opportunity looks for different populations of people, so you can prove that you had X number of people take a look at your employment opportunities, but that doesn't mean that you hired the people. What you could do is you could say that since I'm going to put this money out here to bring Tesla physically into Buffalo, I want you to guarantee that 30% or 40% of those jobs are going to go to people who physically live in Buffalo.
Okay.
Right?
And
let the Buffalo people work out where to find the qualified people.
And then people of color should receive a certain amount of those jobs also.
Right. But I'm just saying that if you make it Buffalo particular, right?
Yes, sir.
You already have laws that say that you have to do things fairly. You have anti-discriminatory laws. You don't have to write that into the new rules.
Okay.
It already exists,
Yes,
right? So if you write your rules that way, put the onus on the people in Buffalo to find people in Buffalo who want to work those jobs. See, the thing that bothers me is when they first opened up the first 600 or so jobs at Tesla, we only had about 20, Buffalo residents that applied for those jobs. Why? Well, number one, most of them didn't hear about it because we put it in some place that you can't get information from easily. We put it in a newspaper. What would make you think that the Buffalo residents were going to read the newspaper?
Hare,
right?
come on now.
I'm just telling you the truth. They put it in newspapers, and the people in Buffalo acted like they never heard of this before. Now, from my point of view, when I heard they were going to throw 600 jobs into Buffalo, I'm like running around grabbing people. Man, they got 600 jobs and be paying $30 an hour. Let's go. Let's get people down there and whatnot. Because when I read it in the newspapers, I got pumped up. That was enough notice, for me.
Yeah.
But apparently that wasn't much notice for the other people, for many people, right? So you got to start that way. Carve out a piece for your city and then make the people in your city own the responsibility for driving people to those employment opportunities.
Take advantage of what's offered.
Don't come to me and act like I got to come and meet you in the bathroom while you're showering and say, oh, by the way, when you get dry, I'm going to drive you down to Tesla so you can apply for a job. That's not going to happen, okay? You got to own that responsibility as a community. Don't come back to me 5 months later and say, oh, I didn't know there was any jobs out there. Put the job notices in the Challenger, they're in the Criterion, they're in the Buffalo News, they're in La Prensa, they're in, I forgot the other Hispanic community-based newsletter, but it's in their newsletters too and whatnot. You have all these, we have hundreds of community-based organizations in Buffalo. Give that stuff to the newsletters and all of those people and let them run around here and recruit those people. We could change the world. We can literally change the world. But you have to change the world yourself. You can't expect somebody else to change your world. You can expect somebody else to treat you fairly, and that's all you can get. All you can get out of this deal is that you will be treated fairly, period. You can't ask for anything else. The rest of it has to be done by you. So I'm not saying this to chastise anybody. I am trying to say that we have to help ourselves not get sucked in to focusing our attention on the people that are not the source of the problem. Even the white people who got all those jobs, discriminated against black people, lost their jobs to globalization, they are not our problem. They are not the people that we have to focus on. We have to focus on the people that own Tesla, that own General Motors, that own Dow Chemical, that own, Rockwell Industries, that own General Electric. We have to focus on the people that own. They're the ones who are making these decisions. They're the ones that are hiring politicians by giving them $50,000 donations to their election campaigns. They're hiring these politicians to advocate for things that are in their interest, but that are not in the interest of the working public, of the United States. We have to get focused on who our real targets have to be to force the kind of changes that we need to see made so that we see the benefits happening for those people in our community. We can do better. We act like we can't do better, but that's not true, Norm. We can do so much better.
Yeah.
We just have to want to do it, right? It's an act of our will, but you have to put your will on the table.
Yeah.
This is a democracy. Democracies only work if you participate. If you don't participate, you're not going to get any of the fruit, right? Do we have a caller hanging on? Let me grab that caller real quick. Hi, caller. Are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All
In
right.
terms of the train thing in Ohio, people are focusing on the accident, but not focusing on the real deal, which is the safety or lack of safety
Right.
of the train system here in this country. Because those same kind of lethal, dangerous chemicals are going through everybody's backyard every day. And it's just by the grace of God that the accident hasn't happened in your neighborhood.
And just to the caller's, point, I want you to just think about this. What are the chances of a truck turning over and spilling stuff out into the environment as opposed to a train on those tracks, those rickety tracks that Norm built back in 1860 and whatnot? On those rickety tracks, one of those trains falling over and spilling stuff into our environment. Why don't we have at least half of that stuff that's being moved by train, have that stuff moved by truck?
Let me just say
I don't want to cut the caller. Let me get the callers. Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing about the train is that the train cars are connected to each other.
Right.
So when one car goes over, another
They
goes
all
over,
go
and
over,
another
right.
goes over, and another
Yep.
goes over. And you have the domino effect.
Yep.
But people need to focus on the real deal. Is there any such thing as safety in this transportation of dangerous and hazardous material, whether by truck, train, car,
Right.
boat, anything else?
And if it can't be made safe, pure safe, can we make it safer? You know what I mean? What Barack Obama did is he actually accomplished regulation that required the adoption of these high-speed braking systems, so that what it does is when the temperature on the brake reaches a certain level, say it gets to 150 degrees on whatever it is they're measuring heat by, if it gets to 150 degrees, by definition, automatically a signal goes to whoever the conductor is on the train that you have to slow this train down. And if you don't slow the train down within a certain number of seconds, if they don't see the train slowing down, then you get an order telling you to stop the train. Stop the train so that you can let whatever it is that got so heated up, the braking system, to let that braking system cool down, right? That was already there. That was legislation that was done back in like 2014, 2013. But then you all hired Donald Trump because y'all thought, you know how y'all did. Donald Trump ran around saying, I'm going to get rid of 2 regulations for every 1 regulation that exists and so on. I'm the godfather of deregulation. And you all went for that. And he told you that it was going to make business, so much more lucrative and so many more people are going to get jobs. That didn't happen. They just put the money in their pockets and whatnot. And then when something really bad does happen, they act like this is an environmental. Oh, I know who's. It's Mayorkas's fault. The guy who just got hired as the FEMA director. It's his fault. What's he got to do with it, right? You got to understand who your enemy actually is. Thank you, man. I know we're near the end of our hour. I appreciate your call.
Take care.
All right, be well. So listen, at the end of the day, we've got to get disciplined as a people. We got to focus on who our real problem is. Our problem is not each other. We are not the ones doing these things to us. The people who are doing these things to us are identifiable. We should focus on them and focus on hiring elected officials who will help us to discipline the people that own, to make them treat the people who don't own fairly, so that we're not poisoning ourselves and destroying our environment and our livelihood. Thank you all for listening to us and supporting us. We look forward to talking to you all on Wednesday here at Living for the People at 91.3 FM WBNY. We'll see you all then.
Strike and be as bright as once in a lifetime. But it's been no fairy tale. We've sure had our fair share of the hard times. But we keep it shuffling along. They said we wouldn't last this long. Yeah, well, don't it feel good just to prove them wrong? We got a love song.